Hi there, my name is Emily Underwood. I work in community engagement at the Missouri Historical Society. On behalf of MHS, I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us virtually for this installment of STL History Live, Chinese St. Louis, William and Anne Tao with Peter Tao. Before we get started, I do have a few things to mention. So safety is, of course, a top priority for us. At the moment, most of the programming at the Missouri History Museum remains virtual, but we are open Wednesday through Sunday. We would love for you to visit if you feel comfortable doing so. Advanced reservations are required to visit both the History Museum and Soldiers Memorial Military Museum, and you can make your reservations at mohistory.org. I do want to thank all of our Missouri Historical Society members for your support and contributions. We're so grateful to you for helping us keep history alive. If you're not a member yet, of course, we would love for you to consider joining. And if you would like to do that or you'd like to learn more about it, you can visit mohistory.org/support to get more information about that. And I also want to thank everyone in the St. Louis County and City for their tax support through the Zoo Museum Tax District. So thank you so much. The STL History Live virtual programming series primarily takes place on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. and Thursdays at 6:30 p.m. We also have monthly Soldiers Memorial Chow and Chat programs. Those are always on a Wednesday at noon. And you can find the entire lineup of our programs at the calendar at mohistory.org or on our Missouri History Museum Facebook page. And if you're unable to join us live or you want to go back and rewatch a program or share it with friends and family, we do post most of our STL History Live programs to the Missouri Historical Society YouTube channel. So I do hope you'll go check that out. Be sure to give it a thumbs up and share that out. And finally, when you close out of the program today, you'll notice that a tab should have opened in your browser with a brief survey. We always value your feedback, so we hope you'll take just a minute or two and let us know what you think about the program today. Before I introduce you to our speaker, I want to first invite Christopher Gordon to the screen to join me. He's going to tell you a little bit about our Chinese American collecting initiative. So I'm going to go there. Chris, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Emily. And thank you, everyone, for coming here tonight and being with us. Like everyone else, I'm very excited to hear Peter's story tonight. Uh, this story that you're going to hear tonight is actually part of a bigger effort that we're launching here at the Missouri Historical Society. We've been preparing a formal collecting initiative for the last couple of years to aimed at collecting and documenting the experiences of Chinese American families and individuals and businesses in our area. We came to realize that our collections lack any real significant resources that preserve and document the legacy of the region's Chinese immigrants and their descendants. And we seek to remedy this by launching this Missouri Historical Society Chinese American Collecting Initiative. When we've launched these sorts of collecting efforts in the past, one of the first things that people often ask us is, what would you like to see donated as part of this effort? And that's pretty simple. We are seeking original archival material, such as family or individual correspondence, if you have diaries or journals, business records, or anything that really recounts the experiences of Chinese American immigrants or their descendants who live and work in the St. Louis metropolitan area. We also look at photographs, family photographs, individual photographs, home movies and videos, scrapbooks, things of those sorts. And of course, any objects or artifacts that tell us a story. One of the other ways that we are capturing history is through our oral history recordings. Um, we've been actively recording histories for the last year or more, although the pandemic did slow us down a bit. But we're still moving forward. We plan to continue this effort, and so we're able to capture more life stories from those of individuals who can really provide personal, meaningful, and yet often overlooked histories from the community. So we're very excited to be able to go out and sit down with individuals and record their stories and be able to provide those You know, they'll go online at various times. They'll be part of our permanent research collections, and you know, they may be used in exhibits and so forth in the future. So if you have any items that you might be interested in donating to the Missouri Historical Society and our collecting effort, please contact me at cgordon@mohistory.org. I'm happy to discuss any items that you might have that would fit within our collecting interests. And certainly I'd love to hear your stories. So with that, I'll turn it over back to Emily. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And I will be sure to post Chris's email in the chat for you right after this. I did also want to mention, of course, with a collecting initiative comes associated programming. And so we do have one other program I wanted to mention to you today. It's The Myth of Dr. Sun Yat-sen and the Story of Pre-War Chinese St. Louis with Dr. Huping Ling from Truman State University. She literally wrote the book on Chinese St. Louis, and she's going to use a story about Dr. Sun Yat-sen and a time he spent in St. Louis as a sort of lens on pre-war Chinese community in the St. Louis area. So I hope you can join us for that in July, and we're working on some other things as well. And hopefully I'll be able to share information about additional programming with you very shortly. So at this time, I'm going to stop my share. The one other thing I did want to mention to you that I forgot to mention is that we do have closed captioning available this evening. So if you would like to have captioning turned on, you should be able to do that in your toolbar. And at this time, I'm going to introduce to you our speaker tonight, Peter Tao. Peter is from St. Louis, and he is an architect by profession. He's a community organizer and connector, deeply engaged with the St. Louis community in the areas of immigration, refugees, culture, racial equity, diversity and inclusion, and the arts. He's even a documentary filmmaker. Having grown up in St. Louis during the period of transition for the Chinese American community, he provides a unique perspective and deep memories to share and stories about the history and stories of his parents. And if you have any questions along the way this evening, please feel free to put those in the Q&A. We'll do our best to get to as many as we can at the end. And I know you're going to love hearing from Peter tonight. So Peter, I'm going to make myself scarce and the screen is all yours.
Oh. Okay, thank you for having me. I was deeply honored to have been asked by the museum to present some history, and particularly history about my parents, although I do not intend this to be so much a story of just about them, because their story is very much a Chinese community. So what I am going to tell you is that their story is an immigrant story, but just to make sure people understand, no immigrant journey is the same reason. This is just their story. And it's about two resilient, optimistic, confident individuals who worked hard, made connections and relationships. And more importantly, after 76 years together, which is always mind-boggling on our part, they became two very proud Americans and two very proud St. Louisans. So let's start, and we're going to try and cover a lot of years in a short while. So Quang Ye, my dad, William Tao, is Quang Ye. He was born in Beijing, China in 1917, and one of four siblings, although you'll start understanding much at those times, one passed away early on. Some photos of him, and the lower three are the main three brothers, of which only one, the youngest one, is still survived. Anne, or Yu Tsai, was born in Hangzhou, China. She was actually one of 9 siblings, although 3 sisters and one brother did pass away during childhood. And you can see little Anne there. But the one thing I really want to make understood when you try and understand on immigrants, what was going on. And it's something that we don't often connect the dots, which is what this presentation is going to try and do, is they essentially were born and lasted through what most Westerners might only know was the Qing Dynasty's last emperor days. Now, of course, the Qing Dynasty itself ended in the early 20th century. However, its emperor, Emperor Puyi, you see in the middle, is him on the left when he was young. He did exist, he remained, and if you know the story, he essentially became a puppet leader of the Japanese created and occupied northern Manchurian territory they called Manchukuo. So this was just an incredible time in St. Louis, in China, to be growing up. It was a time of transitions, conflicts, civil war. There was a lot going on. It was the year of the warlords. And as China was trying to seek its identity as it moved forward. What you see here is, as Bill often described himself, he was the innovative B student, but the super sports star. So that's kind of his legacy as a young teenager. And a little fun fact we'd just like to say is what you see here on the lower left. He actually held the 1936 triple jump record for all of China at 14.5 meters, which is actually not a small feat even in modern era now. Unfortunately, he was representing the North. There was another district, if you will, representing the South. They never got together to do the Olympic trials, and therefore he never had his chance. And he was very humble about it, and he would say, "I'll never know." But this was the Olympics of Jesse Owens and Hitler. So we'll never know, but he might have been there had circumstances not been as so much turmoil. And then a funny thing we always say is on the photo on the left, who plays hockey in China back in 1936? And Yutsai was very self-assured. She was very confident and very stylish. And as you can see, these are some photos of her. And the one on the left, I don't even know when the midriff, I was trying to look it up, the midriff swimsuit came along, but for somehow she was able to boldly wear it in China. And another little fun fact here is the woman on the bottom of this little photo when they were just middle schoolers, that is the mother of Stephen Chu, who eventually became the Nobel Prize winner and former Secretary of Energy here in the United States. I think with all these wonderful immigrant stories, that you just never know the connections and why, and some of that will continue in this presentation. And then we make the joke here in St. Louis of where did you go to high school? Well, they actually were in the same high school, a very famous high school in Tianjin called Nankai. And they were aware of each other. Of course, we like to believe that they weren't dating because my mom was only 15, but they were aware of each other. And just to place another milestone and timeline is from 1931 to 37, during these days in high school, there was known as what's called China and Japan incidences, where Japan was around, there was a lot of little conflicts, but there was no official war at that time. So it's a time of what we would call great adversity and something that many of us can never even fathom what it's like. So that leads up to the fact was, boy, we see these photos, were they the perfect match? Well, we're gonna find out. So life in China was not easy in this time as described. There was the ongoing civil war, which in China, which actually started in 27 through 49. And as you know, for you historians, that was Chiang Kai-shek's following and the nationalist parties and the communist Chinese Communist Party movement by Mao Zedong. At the same time, it was the warlord era, which went on for quite a while, and the country was controlled in various territories, for the most part, by essentially military. And then at the same time, there's the Japanese occupation and eventually war. So that's quite a setting to live in as a young person. So during this time after college, we learned that to be in college meant you had to be very nimble and flexible because no college was in a stable location. First of all, it was somewhat rare to go to college. 30% of high school graduates is kind of what my father had mentioned, could go to quality universities simply due to lack of availability. Their existence, and this is a diagram and map that my father created, where he was identifying mileage and how much territory was covered in these 4-year periods that both he and my mother were experiencing during that time. At its worst times, they both described having to be part of a nomadic university where often they would flee into the mountains just to be placed somewhere else safe for time being. And they would literally be responsible for carrying books of the university. Everyone was assigned something to take care of. So that is just another layer of challenges growing up. And so this is where their journeys began. So my mother is obviously still in high school, but my dad had started his college days. And just to paint the picture again of what's going on, he happened to be in Shanghai in 1937, and this is a very famous period. It's during the Battle of Shanghai when Japan was in Shanghai. But this particular event is called Bloody Sunday. And he wrote of being a student there, of Chinese broadcasts. There was a lot of pride in China for trying to confront the more powerful Japan. And he writes of the time that there was literally a broadcast that the Republic of China Air Force was going to take the offensive and they were going to go after this ship, which is called the Izumo. And I was able to find a photo on the upper that was actually of this moment. And he wrote of everyone running to the shoreline and waiting to watch the plane come. And as you can imagine, bombing probably wasn't the most sophisticated. And the reality is, and this is confirmed in a lot of the research that I've been doing, that there were 4 errant bombs. And he describes it in his memoir of standing on a shoreline cheering and then a bomb exploding not too far from him and people dying around him. We never really understood if that was true, but apparently 4 bombs did land errantly and there were 3,000 deaths and injuries because it landed in a very urban, populated shopping area. His first job in China is one that is fascinating. Is he was assigned to a quasi corporation, as they called it, the China Transportation Corporation. And he was assigned to maintain the vehicles that were going to go on the supply line of the Burma Road, which is on the left. The main supply line to China at that time was from the north. It was from Burma into Kunming. And Kunming was somewhat of a safe area. And during that time while he was there, the US were there unofficially. and the U.S. Flying Tigers, as you may all be familiar with that famous uh, airplane. They were there, and that was one of the main purposes for these trucks, was to bring aviation fuel from Burma down the road to Kunming. And an initial sign of my dad's kind of engineering expertise was he actually, this is an example of a Dodge truck that was made during the military days. He actually used this design in the middle. He didn't invent the design, but it's a coal burning, it's coal burning to convert into fuel for a Dodge. So he converted, I think, 20 something trucks, and they used that to go up and back and forth on the Burma Road. So while he's up there, this is the first moment of kind of romance, fate or coincidence. My mother's up there. So after all those journeys that you see, somehow they're in the same city. And then after they rediscover each other formally, and now she's older, so they started dating for 2 years, and then they tied the knot. Another small story, small world fun fact, is in this city, there's this family called the Yins, and they were friends with my father from Nankai High School that they knew in 1936. And it so happened they were living on the same street. Well, the real coincidence and small world story is the little man, the little boy that my father is holding up. By the way, we learned he was dropped. Is Chi Peng, otherwise known as Frank. Frank and his family eventually immigrated here to the United States. They eventually reconnected. Frank eventually became the godson. And again, small world, in 1997, he was recruited to Washington University to become the head of the biomedical engineering department. And so you can see on the right, in the later years, that was about a 76-year span, knowing my parents and having that family connection, which is really something special. In Kunming during this time, from 1943, the actual road was overrun, so that whole project, transportation project, ended. Soon thereafter, in 45, the Japanese surrendered and began the withdrawal from China. And interesting, while my parents were there, after the Japanese surrender was a incident called the Kuin Incidents. And basically it's a power grab. So the warlord in that Yunnan province called Long Yun, who was, along with the Nationalist Army, cooperating because everyone had the mutual interest of fighting Japan. Well, now Japan is gone, so there was back to internal conflict, and there was an incident in the city at that time. My dad was not there. My mom was in the city visiting with classmates, and it happens a friend, Captain Lei Ying, he was just a young captain in the Nationalist Party, actually drove in and escorted my mom out from the chaos because there was fighting going on in the city. And then many decades later, that's him on the upper right. He was a 3-star general in Taiwan. He, of course, being with the Nationalist Party, had to escape and flee while the Communist Party was eventually moving in. So after 1945, they were reassigned and they went to beautiful Qingdao, otherwise known as Tsingtao, which you know, the beer. This is where my father got further training as an engineer. And he got assigned to take over the duties from a plant engineer. And the plant was a tire rubber works, which at the time was occupied by the Japanese. So they took control of everything, and they were making the tires for their own Japanese military use. Small, brief story there is, you know, my dad had such animosity about Japan occupying the country, and he thought when he went to meet with this Mr. Otani, he didn't remember the first name. He thought he would go in there hating the man, but then he realized he was just a civilian forced to come over to China to run a plant. And so that just broke down some barriers and perceptions. And actually and they actually corresponded with each other after the war. So it shows that people are people, and it's not always the people that make the conflict. And that's a lesson learned by them as well. Meanwhile, at the same time, Yu Tsai finds employment at the U.S. naval base that was positioned there to help with the transition. And that's where she learned her typewriting skills. She worked as a secretary, and she also got her first taste of really understanding the American experience. So those are all big moments that kind of influenced my parents. Then in 46, 47, because China has to rebuild, the government gave an incentive to study overseas. And if you could find opportunity, then they would pay you in some way. And also they gave a very, very favorable money exchange for any kind of money that had to be utilized. So what's fascinating when you really think about this is 1946, is how do you find opportunity in a country that probably had little information coming in? So again, small world, my mom knew a classmate whose husband was a professor at Washington University. So that always answers the question, how in the world did you find St. Louis? And so they corresponded. And again, we just can't believe that they corresponded, you know, what was mail like overseas at that time. And eventually a catalog came. And this is actually a catalog from the WashU archive. That could have been one of the catalogs they received. It's dated 1946. My dad scoured the catalog, found the name of the head of the mechanical engineering department, wrote to him, and again, time goes by, and then eventually correspondence comes back, and it's from Raymond Tucker, and some of you may know the name. Raymond Tucker eventually became the 38th mayor of St. Louis, but he was the chair of the department. And they got their offer. He must teach 9 hours of credit, tuition free, and a stipend of $150. So this gave the opportunity for them to really think. And of course, with all the things going on in China, he just wondered what was going on in their head. Well, that was very much a thing that we never really knew what was going on in their head, even though we knew the story of applying to the university, is we don't know if they were aware of all this US history. Some of you may know the term yellow peril. It goes back to the 19th century, but is very much carried forth to the 1940s. That was where the Asians, particularly Chinese, were just seen as threats for jobs. They were seen as primitive, a lot of bad kind of cartoons like these, showing them eating rats. They were just basically kind of savage. That was kind of the tone. Now, of course, during that time up to more 1940s, there was so many different acts in place by the government. Some of you, I would hope, know the Chinese Exclusion Act. It's the only law to ever prevent any ethnic or national group from coming to the US. So the Chinese were the only ones singled out completely. In 1924, there was a little bit of a change, which gave a quota system, but it was based on the qualified countries and the number of people they had in the country already. So it was a very kind of potentially manipulative process to control immigrants, particularly ones you may or may not want. So in fact, they only accepted 105 Chinese per year, even though by quota of 2%, it should have been over 2,000. And again, it was kind of it was a carry on of the Chinese Exclusion Act mentality. And it really wasn't until 1943 where more immigration was allowed. And primarily, as you know, deals get done, alliances. At that time, China had formed an alliance in the early 1940s to battle Japan. So the U.S. was trying to do some sort of gesture to recognize that people may want to come over here. But so after the hard thinking and with the effects of war going on and all the struggle, they made their decision. It was worth the opportunity. And so they decided they would come to the United States with the intention of returning when conditions improve. Of course, no one knows at that time what conditions would eventually become. So he sets off, and the intention was for Yutsai to come a little later. And it was a 22-day journey. And this is a photo of the U.S. Marine Swallow operated by American President Line. So this is the ship that we believe he was on. And just a little romantic little thing at the bottom. We have all their letters. We have about 150 letters that they kept, or at least my mom kept. And on day 7, of course, this was after 6 days of being seasick, he actually wrote, "I made a mistake leaving you. Maybe I should stay only a year." So anyway, after the 22-day journey, he landed in October 1st, 1947 in San Francisco, 60,000 miles away. He had another 2,000 miles to go. And I only recently found his alien passenger manifest. He's about the 4th line in here. And it's interesting. It gives some basic data, and it even gives can speak English, can write a little, et cetera, et cetera. So he landed in San Francisco by ship. After a brief stay in San Francisco, he arrived in Union Station after a 2-day journey on Union Pacific. This is photos of that era, and you can see that there's a lot of military. So that's kind of like what's going on at that time. Military's coming back. Things are changing in this country. He gets picked up by a representative from WashU and gets taken to WashU. This is all WashU was. This is a photo 1948. A few buildings around the Quadrangle, for those who know it. A few buildings that, of course, were constructed during the World's Fair. And he was assigned to Lee Hall, originally Tower Hall, which was built on the funds from rental money made by the Louisiana Purchase. It is now Umrath Hall, and it's simply administrative. But this is where the graduate students stayed and foreign students, and it's still there today. So during these times, he's writing back and forth, and he's also writing in this journal. He thought he was only a student from China, a couple from Hong Kong, and 1 native Chinese American. He wrote that he thought there were only a few hundred Chinese in St. Louis, more in the city, mainly early immigrants. And this pretty much matches up, even though we haven't been able to find the census data, but it matches up because we have data from 1970. And then in the student life paper of 1947, there's actually an article of the Cosmopolitan Club about being welcoming to students. And it identified 600 foreign students on the campus. So this kind of paints a picture, at least at Washington University, of being here as a foreigner, being here as an immigrant. Also, a sign of the times, my dad wrote one memory as a student that he got on a streetcar and a well-dressed man looked at him and asked him, "What laundry do you operate?" Now, my dad didn't necessarily take that as offensive, but it just showed what people thought of Asians and what they were here for. He wrote back to youth side just so you understand a little about what's going on. Tuition was $125 a semester for those who have kids in college now. That sounds like impossible. Board was $120, and he said he could live off $1.30 a day, but it wouldn't include a lot of hot food. This was the actual drafting room, one of the drafting rooms in the engineering school at the time of the time he was there. And just so you paint the picture of, and this will lead into it, the next slide, but this is actually a quote, this is actually a reference letter from the board of, a supervisor from the Board of Education where my dad worked part-time, and the prevailing wage was $3 an hour. What's interesting is that if you look at the one on the right, this is his letter in 1947. And this is a quote from the letter. America is a country that money is always in the first place. Everybody is talking about money every day and everywhere. They don't feel a little ashamed on being a businessman. Of course, they usually do it in a legal way. Of course, this is a perception from somewhere where there was a lot of corruption going on at time, especially in the warlord areas. But the bottom line was, as an immigrant, money was valuable, money was important, and money wasn't just for making, you know, yourselves rich like a lot of people think. They're coming to take jobs, etc. No, they were sending money back, and he was regularly sending money back, $10 at a time. We discovered in these letters, he started a business with some local St. Louisan for an import-export, where they would be sourcing material, sending it, and my father's second oldest brother was in the import-export business. So they were just trying to find money, ways to enhance what they could. And then we discovered our parents were working the black market. And they were buying things that they thought would be of great value to sell in China. And we discovered that everywhere my dad went, he would buy nylons. And you know, you always hear the story about military in Europe. They would have nylons, they would trade it and barter, and you'd get a lot for it. Well, I guess there is some truth to it. They were doing it in China. They were even sending jewelry back because of what they might be able to get in return. Here's a photo of him at the Board of Education. You can see here, and he's stands out as being a little different in this group of office workers. And that's basically what it was like in the 40s to 50s for him. Meanwhile, as they're writing, they're trying to figure out how to get here. So unfortunately, Anne is on her own. But luckily, she is working in the naval, so she's getting a lot of mentors and mentorship through the Navy and Navy officers. We also discover at the time that they're trying to desperately try to get Anne into the States, at least into a university. And we never knew this until now, after they've passed away, but she was actually admitted to Nebraska Wesleyan in 1948, which he never attended. Now, if you understand a lot of the reason you want to become, a lot of the reason why you want this is because it's easier to come in as a student. So anyway, during all this struggling time, my oldest brother was there. He was 10 months old by the time he came here. So China's in turmoil. She's going all over the place, trying to get a passport, trying to accumulate money, trying to sell things. And eventually she makes her way. And all the passports were coming out of Nanjing. They were overloaded because everyone was trying to get out of the country. But somehow she managed. She scrambled, especially through the help of my father's father. And in January 12th of 1949, she left, and we never knew how she got here, other than she got here. And I found recently an immigration log. She actually flew into San Francisco on a Chinese airline. I think she had a couple stops in Guam and Hawaii, but she came by plane, and shortly later on in 49, Mao enters Beijing and officially declares the country under his rule. But this was a city she was coming to. June of 1949. It wasn't a calm period. This is actually a time period at the Fairground Park pools when the city of St. Louis opened up the pool to African Americans, and this is what happened on the first day. So this is kind of what they're coming into. But nevertheless, he came here, he got his job done of what he needed to do in the 3 years, his thesis paper to the left. And there he is sitting in front, very happily, proudly in front of Washington University on his first car. And another little fun fact is because of the turmoil in growing up, his kind of views towards Japanese control, I guess he made a declaration to himself that he would only buy American cars, and that's what he did till the end of his car ownership period. Anne arrives, faculty life. They were able to stay at WashU at the Millbrook Apartments. They are still there as dormitories. And another fun fact, Stephen Chu stayed there. So the son of the little girl that we all saw in the earlier picture stayed here later on. So during this time, this is about now finding your community. So they're here on their own. There aren't very many Chinese here, as you saw earlier, at least to their awareness. And this is just to paint a picture of what was going on in St. Louis. So Chinatown was kind of at its waning days. It was getting dirty down there. It didn't necessarily have a good reputation. This is an old poster from the early 1900s of Chinese. This is actually a St. Louis poster of Chinese in the Chinatown eating rats. That's a tail hanging down. So that was, again, the kind of perception that people had of Chinese at the time, not necessarily of the students coming in, but that was perception. So they didn't really feel that was a place for them to go to. So they, I think, only went a couple times. And just so you know, the Chinatown area is basically where the General American Life building was built, which is now the Spire headquarters. Interesting, while they're finding a community, a little bit later, a friend of theirs created their own directory. I akin this to a meetup group that you might do online, but they had to do it manually. They were doing their network, and they came up with 53 names of Chinese students by the time of 1950. And these were students from WashU, SLU, Webster, Maryville, and Fontbonne. It's a hand-typed directory, and they left space where they could handwrite the Chinese characters of the students' names. But for any immigrant, just so you know, it's very important. It doesn't always happen, but it's always important that you rely on people. You rely on people to help. You rely on people to be welcoming. And they had many couples who were that way. This one in particular is interesting, I think, story and connection, because the Wilsons, John Wilson was a World War II vet. And my father, and eventually he became head of the engineering at Anheuser-Busch and eventually a client. But one of the things my father discovered was that people in the military, particularly overseas and it's World War II, now he was in Europe, they kind of understood the whole cultural and world theater. And so they understood what the foreigner was going through. So it was actually a very kind attitude of people versus what perhaps your average St. Louisan might have known. And at the time also at Washington University, you got to realize that this is when a lot of military were coming back. Everyone's going to school, GI Bill, all that stuff is happening during these time periods. So there was a lot of veterans there, and that was, I think, very important because it gave them a bit of a comfort zone. And of course, one of the other mentors was Raymond Tucker. He was always helpful. But now, during this time, perhaps a hiccup in the plan. He got his degree, he got his skill. Obviously, they were kind of gauging what was going on in China, but at the same time, there was a lot going on here. In the 1950s, there was McCarthyism was going on, and and this is a picture of a room rounded up with Chinese, rounded up for that very reason. China at the time was also declared support of Korea. So they're entering the Korean War era. And there's still not a great time of welcoming here. There's still segregation, whether or not it's formal or informal. This list on the left is, so you know, the Congress of Racial Equity. They were campaigning at the time when they were here at the beginning to desegregate basically the department store lunch counters. And later on, they put out a list in 1961 of these are what they call open restaurants, in other words, safe restaurants. And we don't know if it's true, but many of those restaurants are the restaurants we were always brought to as very, very young kids. And we don't know if they just felt comfortable there and that's why we were brought there, or whether or not they knew of that list. And meanwhile, there's also, because of the immigration restrictions, there are so many different acts that were in place, none of which was geared toward the Asians, most of it European. But through the legislation, it was worked out a way that they could therefore start accepting some Chinese, and particularly Chinese who were already in the United States. And part of the other mission of this bill and opening up was that because China was showing support of Korea, it was a way of the US getting back at China. They actually wanted to keep the intellectual property here, so they made it a little easier for people to immigrate during that time period. I think about 2,000 people were maybe admitted, Chinese. And so they applied and they got naturalized citizenship eventually in 1955. This is a reference letter from Raymond Tucker confirming employment and stability. And these are letters that we also have that from the US Navy. So it pays to have a good network around you. And so, so the family grows. And one thing you need to understand as any immigrant, most immigrants, they're coming for a better life and their focus is really on the family. And I must say, my parents would do anything to make sure the family was okay. And that was kind of their motivator. So now they're entering the working world. This is 1950. He starts teaching at Washington University. And it's, it makes a living, but it's not making, it doesn't fulfill everything. So while he was teaching, he was also working nighttime, part-time, and part of it was at the Board of Education, as well as doing other just freelance jobs that he could find. But eventually in 1955, he realizes he's making some headway. People are knowing him as an engineer, and he occupies his first office. And we think this is the building because this is the address he writes, although he wrote it as Grand Avenue. This is Grand Boulevard on South Grand. But looking up history, there was a theater there called the Melba Theater, and there were offices there. And this is where they tirelessly work into evening. And at that time, early on with David and Richard before me, they would put them in the movie theater and, parents, close your ears. They would put them in the movie theater and then go back upstairs and work and go down periodically to check if they were okay. And this is a very vivid memory of my brothers. Later on, they get their big break. I'm not really sure how they got the big break, but he got introduced to a well-known architect, Smith and Ensroth, and the developer was the Nooney Company. So he got introduced through his network. And here's a photo of the dedication, 1962, Clayton's first high-rise. And this is the Pierre Laclede building, which is here. Eventually a second phase came. And this became a great relationship with the Nooneys. He did another project or two with them. But this was his big break where he knew, I've made it. I'm making it. I haven't made it, but I am making it. Meanwhile, he's, if you're starting your own business and you're still trying to find your community, he was networking hard. And here he was networking to make sure his name is known. And this is amongst the Institute of Chinese Engineers. So, you got to build this resume building and brand building, I guess you would call it. In 1966, he, with a friend, George Cassis, it was called Cassio Associates. They eventually became Casco, which is still around. They teamed together and built this office building, and this became the real landing spot for William Tao and Associates, although they had been in another location before. And again, as they grew, eventually George Cassis was willing to back out, and they took over the building. And between the two, they tirelessly started building up the William Tao and Associates company. And it was my mom handled the finances, my dad, of course, the engineering, and a lot of the marketing. And fast forward, they built their great portfolio of work. And this is a fun sketch my father had a Chinese student commissioned to do, placing all the buildings, some in their actual positions in the downtown St. Louis landscape of all the projects he had worked on up until 1988 before he retired and sold the company to the employees. And yes, he even did work on the arch. But during all this time, this is kind of where he's always promoting Chinese culture. So this was just a wonderful thing that he did in the office. He brought table tennis to the office in the multi-purpose room in the back. And eventually it became such a sought out place to be. People would sit all around the perimeter. They'd be conversing, eating lunch. And of course, then it's your turn. There was always a winner and a challenger, and it just became a great place. And it really started reinforcing more and more what they were about, which was social engagement. People should get along and get to know each other. It was a wonderful experience. Here I am working summer duties and joining. But during this time, from the 1950s, the climate in St. Louis was changing, and a lot more Chinese were coming here, going to universities. And these are a handful of what we've been able to collect and find. Many of these I've been able to obtain through the siblings who I all grew up with. And this is an interesting photo here. This one is Helena Law is here. Helena, and Harold is one of the ones who was really part of the leadership group at the time. Helena taught at Sumner High School. So she was the only Asian teaching at Sumner High School. So basically, there was no real community to the best of their knowledge. Of course, there must be other smaller communities. So In the same way that people were welcoming and brought them into their house, in the 1960s, this is what happened. They just opened their doors in their basement to Chinese students from all around, but generally from Washington University. And it was just a pleasant, cordial family environment. You could see, I don't know what, if they're gambling, but there's my brothers, they're there, so maybe they're gambling too. But anyway, it was a way to have community. It was giving people a place to feel safe, get some comfort because they would cook Chinese food and just become welcoming and building up a community. And this is a wonderful story. Those very people that you saw in the 1960s, many of those in here are here on a cruise in 2004. It was a reunion. And then eventually in 2019, they visited my parents after they moved away, shortly before they passed away. And this group was really amazing, not only the fact that they maintained and kept in touch with each other, but within that group would be heads of departments at universities. There would be the head, there would be the American president, the first Chinese American president of a major university that's here, Chow Wei-Wu, is San Francisco State, and then even a lieutenant governor of Delaware. So these relationships you build continue if you do it right. So meanwhile, at the same time, while they had those gatherings, there was you needed to find other ways of getting together. There were no community centers, churches or schools at that time. So families got together, and these are just wonderful photos of different groups getting together, barbecuing, doing what everyone does in America. They barbecue, they go out for picnics, and of course the kids get together within the families. So as they are really starting to make it and get established, that of course means things. It means many things personally. First of all, you're able to, get the homes that you dreamed of. So this is a home that in 1966, they bought a lot and they built their home and they lived there for 40 years. And they designed it with a close friend, Chi Chen Jen. He was the chief architect at HOK at the time. And this became now kind of an example of they've made it. They've made it even further. And again, one of my father's American cars, a Buick Riviera, which I really loved. And with a new home comes a larger home and able to accommodate much larger gatherings. And so those gatherings continued from 1966 to 75, and it took over the entire house. And you could see there was kids getting together. I think there was a table here playing games, dancing, moving the tables away, playing ping pong, et cetera, et cetera. So this was the community building, getting stronger and getting to know each other. During this time also, they became started to become known as the father, mother figures, grandpa, whatever you want to call them. And many people turned to them for help, advice. And so this is an example where my father gave away many a bride for either people whose parents were overseas or they were in another city but couldn't afford to get here. And ultimately, they became that, as we call now in their later days, Tao Baba and Tao Mama. Earlier, they would have been called Uncle Bill and Uncle Auntie Tao. But that just started showing how the community started having a leader or someone to look towards. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a leader. And again, the community's building. I think this one is hilarious. So this is before any formal organization, but however, the community and people are still gathering and getting together. There used to be gatherings at schools. I remember these. This is Brittany Woods, 1971, where it would be an annual Christmas gathering. Food will be brought. There would be entertainment, some cultural stuff.
and I just found it hilarious. Everyone's living the American dream, and we had our Santa Claus there, a Chinese Santa Claus. At the same time, the community started getting together. This is the old Fine Arts Theater in U City, now Wei Hong restaurant. This used to be the place where it would be rented on weekends to show Chinese films. And I remember going there, and that's where I first saw my period piece Chinese Kung Fu movies. And here's kind of an example. But this is where now they're trying to bring more cultural arts and any other kind of influences. But at this time, no Chinese language schools. Chinese kids were basically learning through their network of families. In 1968, though, this is actually could perhaps be the first international festival put on the folklore. This is in Forest Park, but the Chinese now were strong enough as a community to come together. And this was, I believe, the first Chinese booth in an international festival. They had 16 countries represented here. And my parents were helped lead the way. Here's my dad, here's me pouring tea, my mom. And that's the little booth where we were trying to present the culture of China. During 1971 is when the first formation happened. A national leader, K.L. Wong, came to St. Louis to meet with my father and some key local leaders, meeting at their my parents' residence. And this is kind of the civil rights, carrying on from what's going on there. And of course, this is the lower right is the sentiment still. And so the Chinese were getting organized nationally, and they came and said, St. Louis and other cities need to start organizing. And in 1972, the League of Chinese Americans formed, which simply just meant we had a local representation that was somewhat organized. And shortly thereafter, in 1973, came the formation of the Organization of Chinese Americans. Now it's called Asian Pacific American Advocates. And in 1973, St. Louis was one of the founding 3 cities, in addition to the national location of Washington, D.C. And this is a little letter on the left, our media release that acknowledged my father's role in galvanizing Chinese around the country and here to help. Fun fact, one of the people that they knew from China, their daughter was staying with us, and there was a logo competition, and she won it, an earlier version. Now, I don't know if it might sound suspicious she was living with us and she won it, but ultimately it's still the logo they use, so I guess there's some value to that. And with these opportunities now became really more opportunities to just integrate more with the community. And because tennis was such a wonderful thing that my dad did while he was at Washington U, he started learning. It was bringing people together. It was a way to get exercise, and it was also good for business. So they had infamous tennis parties throughout. This is the Tao Tennis Classic, and these are just the camaraderie and people that were coming together. This was a version that he just helped with, which was just specifically the Chinese community. And with the tennis became other tennis opportunities. They discovered a tennis people to people, which was kind of a global goodwill type of trip. They would travel to other countries and play tennis. And ultimately, it was able to bring my dad back to China. And here he is on the Great Wall. And sadly, I think he hit the ball into the land, so he officially littered around the Great Wall. And with these travels, of course, comes a lot of tennis ball cans, which we still have. So with all this success and building up into the community, how could they ever forget how they got here? And so one of the first institutions was, of course, WashU, and they would do whatever they could to help in the ways they could. On the photo on the right is the relationships they build, and WashU lowered the flag for both of them at different times when they passed away. But what they did was create new thinking and trying to help others. It wasn't so much just about giving money away. My dad actually came up with the idea of named scholarships. In other words, these would be smaller scholarships that your name could be placed on and you could be connected with a student, not just some financial package that held no names or anonymous. And so that was established. The first one he started in the engineering school in 1974. And ultimately the university adopted it university-wide. And Chancellor Danforth, Dean McKelvey, and William Tao were identified as the visionaries. And to this day, there are 6 Tao endowed scholarships in the engineering school and a prize fund. And actually, I just got notified that one was awarded yesterday at the architecture school, or recently. And how could they not pay attention to tennis? So they always supported the athletic program as well. And so this is all about relationships again and giving back. Here they are with the tennis team. And to honor them, WashU created the Tao Tennis Center. They renamed it the Tao Tennis Center. And a little sculpture was made. And I think the funny thing was my dad was so happy. He said, this is much more meaningful than having a name put on a building. And that relationship built. And ultimately, he worked his way from graduate student through trustee, through connector, helped with the first trip to Asia for their international council, and ultimately got rewarded in a number of ways. The most proud one was where he was given an honorary degree. But during this time, they did not continue to slack off since OCA was very much a part of their interests and wanted to see it flourish. So they continued to lead, support, mentor many in the OCA line of successors and committee members. Ultimately, they were there. They created an OCA Youth Leadership Scholarship because they realized you need more than just old people helping guide the way. They very much believed in younger people. You have to recognize in the 70s, not too many younger people were either around or wanted to take on that leadership. I would say now, which is great, is there are so many in this area, nationally and locally, who are getting involved, wanting to get involved. And I think it's really while it's a sad time right now for Asian communities with the hate incidences, it's also a very optimistic time period with a lot of people from all ages coming together nationally. Of course, one of the other things they supported was anything welcoming immigrants and refugees. So they were always tied to the International Institute very early on. And it's really my mom who was the one who started first in 1979, I think. She became a board member. Subsequent decades, basically throughout 4 decades, many of us in the family served as board members or chairs or advisors, etc. And to honor them in 2009, the International Institute created a fund which anyone can donate to. It's called the Tao Fund, which helps supplement refugee resettlement. Again, with the love for China, their homeland, particularly my dad. They were always trying to raise awareness of it, and very early on, you know, trying to get these festivals started. So the festivals really didn't start till 1994, and really under the leadership of the CCES, Chinese Culture and Education Services, which today completely runs Culture Day as we know it, or China Day as we know it, in the Missouri Botanical Garden. And thanks to their leadership, they are continuing it and growing. And this photo just happens to be on a day, I think it was 2007, where St. Louis actually proclaimed May 19th as China Day. And that's Dr. Raven, Charles Dooley, Mayor Slay. And then finally, in terms of participation, they've always been fond, again, of anything Chinese. So my father was a board member for a long time at the Missouri Botanical Garden, and Anne served on the members board. And so they were quite involved in some way of either being ambassadors or supporters, emotionally and financially, with their Nanjing project, Friendship Garden, which hopefully everyone knows about, and a Flora of China project, was a world-renowned research project at the garden. And then finally, along the way, making them quite proud and happy, you do get to meet some people: Pat Nixon, George Bush, Harrison Ford. And jokingly, my brother sent a Dolly Parton impersonator to celebrate an occasion, I can't even remember what it was, in Nashville. And I think they might have met Dolly Parton. But sadly, after 71 years, this is where the St. Louis story comes to a close, or nearing a close. With their age and a need for help, we decided it was not appropriate for them to be in a facility, that they really needed more care and personal attention and personal love. And thankfully, number one son, David, volunteered to have them live with him in their home from 2008 to the time when they passed away. And it was a wonderful ending to their life. And we were also glad that they were able to see the Blues. They were 30-year season ticket holders. We were glad they were able to at least know that the Blues won the Stanley Cup. We don't really think they watched it. This is their last visit to the Arch. I took them down there before they left, because they were just, again, so proud of St. Louis and the Arch. And this is them when we were able to get them at least this far at age 101 and 97. So like any proud family and any proud immigrant, family is very, very important. And so they were successful in leaving a great legacy. We are all family members who like each other. We uphold a lot of their lessons and cherish their memories that were gained. So there are, at this time, 3 sons, 9 great-grandchildren, and 7 great-grandchildren. And the lessons they instilled upon us are carried through every day. And so finally, this is the story of William and Anne, and how they came to the United States, how they tried to make life better for themselves and the community. And I think they would be very, very proud to know of what's going on today, that the community has come together and is trying to build, and that they would be ecstatic. They kind of knew about it, but I don't know if they really grasp it. And they would be ecstatic that the Missouri History Museum is taking on this initiative to really document the history of the Chinese in St. Louis. And thank you.
Peter, I wish you could hear everyone applauding, because I'm sure they are from their homes. That was wonderful. Really great stories about your parents, and told with a lot of love. So that was great. Thank you. We do have time for a few questions. We did get a couple questions coming in while you were talking, asking about language. So how much English your parents knew before they came to the US, how they navigated language barriers when they were here, and then also, was it spoken in your home growing up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they knew. I'm not sure exactly. They knew English, not great English. They knew English in China. obviously my mom's English was getting better because she started working for the Navy. I don't know how that compares to your average student there at the time, average or student of who was getting the kind of roles they got. So they did know English, but it wasn't, great. And then in all these letters we have where my dad is writing, it's been really fascinating to watch the chronology of writing 100 letters or so. And in each one of them, English is getting better. He's even admitting it's getting better. He's going to movies. They went to movies in China, in Kunming, because it was because the US was there. Most of the movies they went to were in English. So they would go there, they would watch it, they would absorb it. And it's very much what a lot of immigrants say. You watch TV or you watch some silly sitcom or whatever. So that is how it worked. But yes, they learned there and here. As far as here for like the kids, they always had the belief that they would go back sometime. And also they realized the challenges of being here and being a kid here. So they wanted us, and, I think in hindsight, you look at it different ways, but they wanted us to fit in and not kind of be an outsider. So they always wanted us to speak English. They spoke Chinese in the house, but they didn't actually attempt to teach us other than words, phrases. There was a time period where some family members offered to teach, and then they would ship you off and go to a weekend at someone's house, which is horrible because you're at a weekend and you're at someone's house and all you want to do is play. So that's kind of the language situation.
We're getting so many questions. I'm trying to sift through them, and lots of comments too about people who remember your parents and were so appreciative of their presence and influence in their lives. So I'll be sure to share all of those comments with you later, but I'm trying to make sure I get to all of the questions here also. There's a question about tennis. Did they play tennis before they came here, or did they pick that up here in the States?
My dad, I think he played a little tennis, but but it's really, actually, it's a good story. So it's really, it's what gave him some comfort, relaxation at Washington University. So if anyone knows the campus from where they stay, it's a 5-minute walk to the tennis courts. And there were 6 tennis courts in that old photo. You can see the tennis courts all on its own, and then the campus is more towards the eastern end. So he played there regularly, and he would just meet people, mainly Chinese students, the few that there were. They would play there. And actually, to this day, if you go to WashU and go there on weekends or holidays, you'll also notice that there tends to be more foreign-born there because they don't go home, they don't know what to do, and they actually wind up using that to get together and just have some fun. So that's where he learned tennis. And then as he built up his tennis and learned and got better and really good at it, it wasn't until my mom turned 50 that she decided, I'm not going to be left out of this. I see what it's doing for you. And she started learning. And if you live to your 90s and you start in your 50s, you can still get plenty of tennis in, which is what basically they did. They literally played almost to their late 80s or 90s, early 90s.
That's fantastic. I've got a question about whether you and your siblings are in touch with relatives in China.
We really only have one relative, and that's my mother's nephew and niece. So her sister's passed away. Mm-hmm. She has a surviving son, and they actually have come here to St. Louis on many occasions. They actually stayed here for a long period of time and stayed with my parents, and they've gone back and forth over the years. They're there now. She has another sibling that basically, I've never quite understood this, but I guess people who are of their age and of those generations, and if you have a bigger family, you often learn about, oh, the sibling just disappeared. And then it's hard to keep in touch too. So she does have a brother, my cousin believes still is alive, but no one knows his whereabouts. But they have very little family left over there, just really her grandson.
I'm going to try to kind of synthesize two questions here for you. I have a couple of questions kind of referencing your work and what you're doing and your activism and sort of in terms of Asian American history and stories and community. And so somebody's just wanting to know about your work and what you're doing, and also what you think the impact is of the lack of knowledge of Asian American studies and Asian American history in St. Louis.
Yeah, so I was fortunate that my father laid the groundwork with a memoir. And I'm thankful for Missouri History Museum for wanting to tell the story, which has got me into doing a lot more research. And I think the thing that, and this is not just their story or a Chinese American story, this is all our stories. And I want to emphasize that to anyone who's in the audience. You're all from some immigrant somewhere at some time. And I think what happens is we only learn kind of the simple things, just as we only learn some of the main things of my parents. But like, I had no clue that, between just in the city they were living in, Chiang Kai-shek's army, warlord, Japanese, all this. I mean, you just don't they just kind of group it together as like, yeah, it wasn't an easy time, So that has really got me to really want to pursue this more. And because I'm very proud of kind of how the Chinese community, especially now, is shaping up in the St. Louis area, I'm committed, and I've talked to some people on this audience. I've talked to some about how to continue doing some research, because during my time periods, I identified there's some missing data or information as to know what was going on. So I want to do that. As personally, I mean, I'm an architect, but personally, I'm involved in anything really out of my true interest of anything with immigrants, refugees, and the culture, and mainly to make sure that people understand. Because, I must say that with all the Asian hate going on now, and then the topics of the Chinese Exclusion Act, it's not new, it's 1882, but the fact that it's got kind of put to the side, and understanding, even in, as I only highlighted 3 legislation bills, but there's more on how it was discriminating and restrictive and all this stuff. Those are the things that I think in many different cultures that isn't told. Even my kids who are in their 20s, they just came to us when we were kind of educating ourselves more these days. They just said, why wasn't this told in classroom? And so you can, and so I believe you can see some states doing it, wanting to start bringing ethnic studies and stuff like that. I believe Missouri is opposed to that. Illinois has adopted it. California adopted it recently. Illinois adopted ethnic studies, and then they specifically adopted Asian American studies as being a requirement, I believe. So, you'll find out, I'm sure we'll find out in this country that some will adopt it, some won't. I don't see it as we're imposing anything on anyone. I just think people need to understand, and yes, there's a lack of that.
Well, Peter, thank you so much. We're about at the end of our time, but so appreciative of the work you're doing. I think continuing your parents' legacy in so many ways, and really appreciative of you coming and sharing their story with us today. That was really wonderful to listen to, and looking forward to hearing more and more stories of people in the Chinese and Chinese American communities in St. Louis. And hopefully some of you watching maybe have some stories or objects to donate. I put the email in the chat, but if you missed it, it's cgordon@mohistory.org if you want to inquire about the Chinese American Collecting Initiative. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. Don't forget to go back and find this program on the Missouri Historical Society YouTube channel. It should be up within the next couple days. Make sure to give it a thumbs up, share it out with anyone who might like to see it. And you can find the whole lineup of all of our upcoming programs at mohistory.org if you look at the events calendar, or under the events at our Missouri History Museum Facebook page. So thank you again. Don't forget to fill out the survey that should have popped up. Let us know what you think. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate you, Peter, and hope you all have a good night. Thank you.